Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for a quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today on the Workplace Minute, we're looking at a new compensation report from Glassdoor, which shows that the gender pay gap is still very real in the United States. We'll break down the findings, the history behind this gap, and why the so-called motherhood penalty continues to shape careers and compensation in ways that should make all of us uncomfortable. A new report from Glassdoor that looks at something that frankly should not still be a major issue in 2026, it's the gender pay gap. The report, titled Beyond the Gap, Women's Compensation Report, analyzes compensation data across industries and roles to understand how women are being paid compared to men in the workforce today. And while there's been progress over the years, the reality is that gap has not gone away. Women in the United States still earn less than men overall, and even when researchers control for factors like job title, experience, education, and employer, the gap still exists. It's smaller than the raw data gap, but it's still there, which means that when we compare similar roles and similar qualifications, women, on average, are still being paid less. Now, when the discussion about the gender pay gap comes up, there are always a set of explanations that people reach for. Some of the difference, we're told, comes from structural factors in the labor market. Women are more likely to work in industries that traditionally pay less, such as education, caregiving, and many service roles. They're also more likely to work part-time or to step out of the workforce for periods of time due to caregiving responsibilities. Those factors do explain part of the overall pay difference, and they're important to acknowledge. But explanations are not the same thing as solutions. What those explanations actually reveal is that we still have a labor market and a social structure that undervalues work that has historically been done by women, and that continues to place a disproportionate share of caregiving responsibilities on those same women as well. So when you step back and look at this from a longer historical context, it becomes clear why this gap has proven to be so persistent. For decades, really for generations, women have had fewer opportunities for advancement, less access to higher-paying leadership roles, and limited pathways into the highest-paying technical and executive jobs. While many of those barriers have come down some in the past few decades, their effects still ripple through the workforce today. Career paths take time to develop, leadership pipelines take years to build, and systemic inequalities don't just disappear overnight simply because laws or policies might change. But perhaps the most powerful factor that continues to show up in research about compensation inequality is something economists often call the motherhood penalty. When women have children, their careers frequently slow down. They're more likely to take time away from work, reduce their hours, or miss opportunities for advancement because employers assume their priorities have shifted. And in contrast, the opposite pattern often shows up for men. Researchers sometimes refer to this as the fatherhood bonus, where men who become fathers are often perceived as more stable, more responsible, and more committed workers. And as a result, they may actually see their careers accelerate rather than slow down. It's the same life event, but it produces completely different career outcomes. And that dynamic helps explain why pay disparities persist even when women and men begin their careers on relatively equal footing. There's also a broader societal issue wrapped up in this conversation. In the United States today, we're seeing declining rates of marriage and falling birth rates. There are many factors driving those trends, including economic pressures, housing costs, student debts. But another factor that deserves attention is the reality that many women are forced to weigh the potential career costs of starting a family. If having children means risking slower career progression, lower earnings, and fewer opportunities for advancement, then the decision to have a family becomes far more complicated. And for many men, the story is different. Historically, marriage and fatherhood have often been associated with career stability and economic growth. And employers do view married men often with children as more reliable and more committed. And meanwhile, women with children often face assumptions about their availability, their ambition, or their willingness to take on more demanding roles. That difference in perception can quietly shape hiring decisions, promotion decisions, and compensation decisions in ways that simply compound over time. And when you think about it in those terms, the gender pay gap is not just a workplace issue. It's also a societal one. It's tied to how we structure work, how we support families, and how we distribute responsibilities for caregiving across our culture. So employers absolutely have a role to play in improving the situation. Greater pay transparency can help reduce disparities, Regular pay equity audits can identify and correct these inequities. Strong parental leave policies and childcare support can make it easier for parents of both genders to stay connected to their careers. And perhaps most importantly, organizations can work to build cultures where caregiving responsibilities are normalized and supported for both mothers and fathers. And at the same time, public policy matters too. Countries that provide stronger parental leave systems, more affordable childcare infrastructure, and broader support for working families tend to see smaller gender pay gaps over time. That tells us something important. The structure of our systems influences the outcomes we see in the labor market. And that brings me to the end part of this conversation, and it frankly makes me a little frustrated. We've been talking about the gender pay gap for a very long time. There's been progress, yes, but the fact that this issue is still with us in 2026 should make all of us uncomfortable. We understand many of the underlying drivers of the gap. We know that policies like paid parental leave, childcare support, and pay transparency can make a difference. And we know that leadership representation matters. And we know that cultural expectations about caregiving still shape workplace outcomes. In short, we know all these things. We should know better, which means we should be doing better. Men especially need to do better in recognizing these dynamics and supporting change. Organizational leaders who remain disproportionately men need to do better in building systems that ensure fairness and opportunity. And policymakers need to stop creating barriers that make it harder for women to succeed professionally, while also building their families and communities. The gender pay gap is not inevitable. It doesn't have to be that way. It's the result of choices about how we structure work, how we value different kinds of labor, and how we support our families. If we want a future of work that is truly fair, sustainable, and equitable, then those choices have to change. That's it for today's Workplace Minute. Thanks so much for listening, and a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. If this episode made you think about how your organization ensures fairness at work for everyone, please share it with a colleague. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H Advisors.